Good morning. My name is Tammy Smith. On behalf of Superintendent Hoffmeister and the Oklahoma State Department of Education, I would like to welcome you to our webinar this morning entitled Identifying and Providing Transportation for Homeless Children and Youth. I would like to say right up front that if you have any questions at any time during this presentation, if you would just type those into the chat box and I will answer those at the end. Okay, let's get started. Today's agenda, Part 1, Identifying Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness. We're going to talk about some of the barriers they face, the effects of homelessness, and the preventive value of education. Look at a little bit of data from Oklahoma. We're going to spend a lot of time on the definition of homelessness as defined by the McKinney-Vento Act and determining the eligibility under McKinney-Vento. And then Part 2, we'll talk about transportation to the school of origin, how we need to provide prompt provision of transportation, what modes of transportation you can use, school of origin transportation, and some strategies and suggestions. Okay, so homelessness creates barriers. Some experiencing homelessness may face difficulties in being able to meet the standard school enrollment requirements. They move around a lot, they change schools a lot, they can't keep up with their records, they don't know where things are. The students might be hungry, tired, and stressed. Oftentimes they won't have school supplies or even a quiet place to study. They may not have access to reliable transportation. And in the case of unaccompanied youth, they would not have a parent or a guardian to help navigate them through enrolling in school and making it successful for them. Homelessness affects education. Okay, so if the family doesn't have transportation, then the kids may not be able to get to school. So you see that chronically absenteeism from homeless students. If they are chronically missing school, then they're not in school to get taught, so their grades are going to be lower. They're going to score poorly on assessment tests because they've missed a big chunk of education at one place or another. And then they get behind and they get frustrated or overwhelmed and they drop out of school. So you can see how it just snowballs from starting out with that lack of transportation to chronic absenteeism to lower grades till finally they drop out. High school graduation, just a few stats, is critical to prevent youth homelessness. Youth without a high school diploma or GED are 364% more likely to experience homelessness as young adults than their peers with diplomas. Homelessness is the highest risk factor for young adult homelessness. So you can see that we want to do whatever we can to help them. The preventative value of education, children in quality preschool programs are more likely to graduate from high school. Having a high school diploma or a GED then is associated with lots of positive life outcomes, lower unemployment, less criminal justice involvement, higher income potential, better health outcomes, and they have a larger lifespan. 95%, or a little bit more, of the jobs created since the Great Recession, which was what ended in 2009, have gone to workers with at least some post-secondary education. And I can give you the resources for those. If you want those, just email me and I can give you the resources where I got those statistics from. So we can see that post-secondary education is increasingly important for these students to move out of poverty and homelessness and live a healthy, productive life. But they have barriers, and so our job is to help navigate past those barriers, help get those kids in school, and help them to be successful. ESSA Basics, the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was signed into law in December of 2015. ESSA reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and the Education subtitle of the McKinney-Vento Act. ESSA amendments provide new opportunities for schools to help students experiencing homelessness succeed in school. And that's what we're all about. That's what we're wanting to do. Now, just a little data from our own state here. In 2017-18, Oklahoma Public Schools enrolled 26,155 homeless children and youth, including 2,540 homeless students with limited English proficiency, 4,926 homeless students with disabilities under IDEA, and 2,133 unaccompanied youth. Okay, if you can see this, we said show that 5% were unsheltered, 2% were living in hotels or motels, 8% was in some type of a shelter or transitional housing, and the vast majority, 85%, were doubled up. Common causes of family homelessness: economic challenges, they lost their job, there's a lack of affordable housing, health challenges, they might have disabilities, mental health issues, substance abuse, or it could be domestic violence. Common causes of youth homelessness: abuse or neglect, economic challenges where maybe a parent is telling an older teen that they have to get out and go to work to help provide for the family, or it may be conflict with parents because of pregnancy, gender identity, sexual orientation, blended family issues, substance abuse. There's just a myriad of reasons of why we see the homelessness here in Oklahoma that we do. We're going to talk about the definition of homelessness, the McKinney-Vento definition, and it is children or youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, including children and youth that are sharing or doubled up, the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to the lack of alternative adequate accommodations, living in emergency or transitional shelters or are abandoned in hospitals, living in a public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations or similar settings, migratory children living in the above circumstances, and then the term unaccompanied youth includes a homeless child or youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. We're going to look at how you as the district homeless liaison can determine McKinney-Vento eligibility. Does the student's living arrangement fit into one of the specific examples listed in the McKinney-Vento Act's definition of homeless? To determine whether a student's living arrangement is mentioned specifically in the definition of homeless, it is helpful to consider the definition phrase by phrase. And so that's what we're going to do here, is just take this phrase by phrase. Sharing the house of other person implies that the family or youth is staying in someone else's housing. Questions that you might ask to help determine if this is the case include: is the family or youth living in someone else's residence as an urgent measure to avoid being on the street or in another precarious situation? Where would the family or youth live if not sharing someone else's housing? Does the family or youth have a legal right to be in the residence? And can the family or youth be asked to leave at any time with no legal recourse? So not everyone that lives in somebody else's house is considered homeless. Okay, so that's why it's important that you ask those questions. You know, in some cultures, it's the norm for families to live together. Sometimes two families, two single parents maybe live in the same house for convenience sake, to help each other out with each other's children or to share the cost associated with living in that house, but that doesn't necessarily make them qualify as homeless. And so it's your responsibility as the homeless liaison to ask the right questions and find out the information to see if that doubled up situation really does make them McKinney-Vento eligible. Due to loss of housing, This implies that the family or youth has no personal housing available. Did the family or youth lose their previous housing due to an eviction or an inability to pay the rent, mortgage, and/or other bills? Was it due to destruction of or damage to the previous housing? Due to abuse or neglect? Due to an inadequate or hazardous physical environment caused by infestations, drug or alcohol abuse, domestic violence, or some other unsafe circumstance? Or would it be maybe due to the absence of a parent or guardian due to abandonment, death, incarceration, or a similar reason? Economic hardship implies that limited financial resources have forced the family or youth to leave personal housing due to an inability to pay the rent, mortgage, and/or other bills and share someone else's housing. The way that the shared housing came about and the intention of the residents are significant. Has the family or youth been forced to share someone else's house due to economic hardship caused by an accident or illness, the loss of employment or public benefits, or a similar reason? Living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to the lack of alternative adequate accommodations. Most families or youth living in these types of homes or housing are likely to be considered homeless, as these arrangements are rarely fixed, regular, and adequate, or intended to serve as a permanent residence. However, considering whether alternative adequate accommodations are available can help identify exceptions to that. There are parts of the state where people choose to live off the grid, so to speak, in a trailer or a tent. They don't consider themselves homeless, okay? Most trailers would be considered fixed, regular, and adequate. Asking questions such as condition of trailer, the number of people living there, and whether the family or youth has an adequate alternative accommodation available can help identify possible exceptions. Living in an emergency or transitional shelter. Children and youth living in emergency or transitional shelters are considered homeless unless they are wards of the court. So if they're awaiting foster care placement, they are no longer considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act. This includes children or youth living in youth shelters, family shelters, domestic violence shelters, and transitional living programs. However, shelters are often not an option here in Oklahoma. We don't have shelters in every area of the state. Sometimes shelters won't let families stay because they exceed the number of people they'll let stay there, or they're young adolescent men or boys and they don't want them in their shelters, or they don't have enough beds, or sometimes families just don't feel safe staying in the shelters. So this isn't always a viable option here in Oklahoma. Abandoned in hospitals, living in a public or private place not designed for or ordinarily used as regular sleeping accommodations for human beings, such as living in somebody's shed in the backyard, living in a car park, public space, abandoned building, bus or train station, or similar setting. Those are largely self-explanatory, and we don't have much questions when it comes to those. Those are pretty easy to identify people that would be in those situations as homeless. Substandard housing. In considering whether a living arrangement would be considered substandard, districts may consider whether the arrangement lacks one of the fundamental utilities, such as water, electricity, or heat. Is it infested with vermin or mold? Does it lack a basic functional part such as a working kitchen or toilet? It may present unreasonable dangers to adults, children, or persons with disabilities. And you have to check with what the housing standards are in your locality, because those vary. Different localities have different housing standards. But pretty much if they don't have water, electricity, or heat, they're going to be substandard, right? Migratory children living in the above circumstances. So migrant children are mentioned specifically in the definition of homelessness, as migrant families often live in conditions of poverty and may not be able to afford fixed, regular, and adequate housing. However, migrant children are not categorically McKinney-Vento eligible. They're eligible only if their living arrangement is one described in the Act's definition of homelessness. Okay, so just being a migrant child does not make them homeless, but they could be. Okay, for any children or youth, including an unaccompanied child or youth, to be eligible for McKinney-Vento services, his or her living arrangement must meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. A guardianship issue alone without homelessness does not convey McKinney-Vento eligibility. Okay, so we have a student, we'll call him Sam. He presents himself to you as homeless. You do your due diligence and ask the appropriate questions and determine that Sam does meet the definition of homeless per the McKinney-Vento Act. You also discover that Sam is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So this student would be served under McKinney-Vento as an unaccompanied homeless youth. Excuse me. Then we have Billy. Billy has been referred to you by a teacher because she's heard rumors that Billy's not living with his parents any longer. You ask him questions and find out that he's moved in with relatives, maybe an aunt and uncle, grandparent, whoever, because his dad is being transferred due to a job to another state. Excuse me. But he's living with these relatives. They have a fixed, regular, and adequate home. And even though they are not his legal guardians, he does have that fixed, regular, and adequate home. He is not a homeless child. He would not be considered homeless. Therefore, he would not be McKinney-Vento eligible. He is unaccompanied, but he's not homeless. So if your district needs guardianship paperwork, then you're going to have to work to resolve that issue through other channels, but it's not a homeless question. Okay, a step-by-step process. Step one is get the facts. Use a housing questionnaire that asks about the child's or youth's living arrangement as part of your district's enrollment paperwork. If the questionnaire indicates that the student might be experiencing homelessness, refer the questionnaire to the local liaison for the next steps. And then the local liaison will contact the parent or guardian or that unaccompanied youth to get more information. When you're talking to them, avoid using the word homeless on the school forms or in conversations. Excuse me. Explain to the family or youth that you are requesting this information to help you determine whether the child or youth would be eligible for additional supports or services. Conduct this conversation in a private space and in a diplomatic manner, and refrain from contacting people or agencies outside the school system to seek more information about the family or youth situation. Many times, if they're doubled up, the family whom they are living with has a lease, and that lease agreement doesn't include extra people living with them. Excuse me. So if you go to that family or go to the owner of that housing and ask questions, then that family they're living with may lose their housing, and now you have two homeless families, okay? So you can't go and ask those questions of people outside of the school system. You can talk to the parents and the youth and find out the information. Step two is to analyze the facts. Once you have gathered the information, the next step is to determine whether the child or youth's living arrangement meets the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. Consider whether the student's living arrangement fits into one of the specific examples listed in the definition. And if not, consider whether the student's living arrangement would be considered homeless because it is not fixed, regular, and adequate. I apologize. Step three, seek additional input as needed. So if you still can't determine whether a particular situation meets the definition of homelessness, then check with other people. You might call some of your peers in other districts and run it by them. You can always call up here at the State Department and talk with your state coordinator, or you can call the National Center for Homeless Education helpline. Be aware they don't answer, and it takes a few days for them usually to get back to you, but they are very good about getting back and helping you work through those situations. Okay, so the local liaison has the authority and responsibility to ensure that eligible students are identified. This should be a collaborative effort with school personnel and through outreach and coordination activities with other entities and agencies. Eligibility determination should be made on a case-by-case basis, considering the circumstances of each student. Pay close attention to the legislative wording as it may provide needed clarity. And then determining eligibility is only the first step. Once your district determines that a child or youth is McKinney-Vento eligible, then the district and school should provide all rights and services required by law. Okay, and in other words, not only do you have the responsibility to identify these students as McKinney-Vento eligible, then you have the responsibility to serve these children, find out what their needs are, and help see if the district can meet those needs to help these students become successful students. Okay, then part 2 of today's webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about transportation. The McKinney-Vento Act requires schools to immediately enroll homeless students, with enrollment defined as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. Therefore, LEAs must arrange transportation without delay. Transportation arrangements should ensure that a homeless student is able to participate for the full school day, neither arriving late nor leaving before the school day has ended. So providing transportation where the student gets there, 2 hours after school has started, or having to leave early so that they can then pick up other students when school is out, is not the right thing to do. Determining the mode of transportation. According to the U.S. Department of Education's Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program non-regulatory guidance, based on the best interest of the student and in consultation with the parent, the LEA ultimately determines the mode of transportation. Okay, so there's a lot of options out there. It could be a bus, it could be a van, it could be, maybe providing a taxi fare for them, whatever. But you have to come up with a way that aligns with SEA and LEA pupil transportation policies and safety standards, and must not create a barrier to the student arriving to school on time or cause an undue burden on the parents or the students. Transportation must be provided to and from the school of origin at the request of the parent or guardian, or in the case of an unaccompanied youth, at the request of the local liaison. Based on the amended definition of school of origin under ESSA, school of origin transportation rights extend to public preschools and receiving schools. So if they went to a public preschool in a district that they're not living in, you are still required to provide transportation then to that school of origin. If they're transitioning from elementary to middle school, then that receiving school is still considered in that school of origin. If a McKinney-Vento eligible child or youth continues to live in an area served by the LEA in which the school of origin is located, the student's transportation to and from school of origin must be provided or arranged by the LEA in which the school of origin is located. If the homeless child or youth living arrangements in the area served by the LEA of origin terminate and the child or youth, even though they're continuing his or her education in the school of origin, begins living in an area served by another LEA, the LEA of origin and the LEA in which the homeless child or youth is living must agree upon a method to apportion the responsibility and costs for providing the child with transportation to and from the school of origin. If the LEAs are unable to reach an agreement, the responsibility and costs for transportation must be shared equally. Okay, so you're going to want to have that relationship or your transportation directors with other districts that are close by yours so that you can make those arrangements easily and work those the cost out as well as how you're going to provide that transportation. Strategies and suggestions. Have a plan. Don't wait till a homeless student shows up before you start thinking about how you might provide transportation for them. Have that plan. Maybe arrange a meeting of area local liaisons and transportation directors to establish a plan that may be implemented immediately when transportation is needed for a homeless child. In that meeting, address issues of cost, responsibility, logistics, including when providing inter-district transportation, so that there will not be a delay in that child's school attendance. Explore flexible bus routes that can be implemented easily. So you might want to maintain a list of shelters or hotels, motels, campgrounds, other areas in your district where homeless families may live. We've seen them live there in the past, so that these locations can be included in bus routes on short notices. Use discretion and sensitivity. Okay, so whatever the mode of transportation you're using should not stigmatize a homeless student or betray the confidentiality of his or her living arrangement. For example, if you pick up students from a homeless shelter, don't do that in a way that everybody else that's on the bus knows that that's where they're living. Okay, maybe pick them up first or drop them off last, but don't put that burden on them that other people would know what their living situation is. Encourage families and youth to inform the local liaison when they are moving. Okay, have a relationship with that family so that if they are moving, you know that, so the bus isn't out there to pick them up and they're not there. Or you get a call and say, where's the bus? And you're like, I didn't know where you were. Okay, so you've got to have that relationship with that family so that you can adjust those transportation plans accordingly. Public transportation. If utilizing public transportation, ensure that assistance is provided for parents to accompany young children to and from school. Don't put a kindergartner on a public bus by themselves. I know you all wouldn't do that, but just as a reminder. Okay. Designate transportation contact. Identify a district transportation staff member who will serve as the point person to arrange transportation for McKinney-Vento students. Safety of students is important, so always be mindful of state and local policies for student transportation safety. Okay, the McKinney-Vento Act does not override safety policies. Don't stuff 20 people into a Suburban that holds, 8 or 9. I don't even know. Okay, so it is the responsibility of you, the local liaison, to ensure that the parent, guardian of a homeless child or youth and any unaccompanied youth is fully informed of all transportation services available, and including transportation to and from school of origin, and that they are assisted in accessing transportation to the school selected in accordance with the best interest determination. Just to reemphasize, LEAs must provide homeless students with transportation to and from the school of origin when it's requested by parent or guardian or the local liaison on behalf of an unaccompanied youth. In addition to providing transportation to the school of origin, LEAs must provide students in homeless situations with transportation services comparable to those provided to other students in the school. Just as a note that even if your district does not provide transportation for non-homeless students, if you have a McKinney-Vento student, you are mandated by law to provide that transportation for them. Even if you don't receive the McKinney-Vento subgrant. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Now I'm ready to answer any questions that you might have put up here.
I know one person asked about getting a copy of the PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint will be posted on our website. It generally takes a couple of days to get that up there.
And good, it looks like you have some other questions here. Let me see. There was that one. This one here is actually the one.
Question about unaccompanied homeless youth. If the person the student is staying with does not have any power of attorney or some type of temp guardianship papers, would this not present a living situation that is not fixed and therefore be a McKinney-Vento eligible living situation? If the adult is not responsible for the student, he or she can lose his housing at any moment. If the parents have made an arrangement, such as with, in my earlier example, with a relative, and that relative has fixed, regular, and adequate housing, then they're not going to be considered McKinney-Vento eligible, even without that relative having that POA. Okay. Everybody here is shaking their head yes. What if they are not a relative? Again, if the parent has made that arrangement with that family, it's fixed, regular, and adequate. They are not going to be considered homeless. If your district does not receive the grant but uses Title I set aside for services to homeless students, can all students, even those in non-Title schools, be served? All homeless students can be served with that homeless set aside, even if they're not in a Title I school. Other questions? Oh. Doesn't matter if the student is 18 or over. Up to 21? As long as they're enrolled in school up to 21. And then they age out, right? How often should you reevaluate homelessness? Every school year, okay? So if a student is homeless at the beginning of a school year, they find fixed, regular, and adequate home during the middle of the year, they are considered homeless till the end of that school year. When the new school year starts up, if they are still in that fixed, regular, and adequate housing, they are no longer considered homeless, okay? But this is something that you, as the liaison, should be checking every year because situations change. They may have found a home that you weren't aware of over the summertime. They're in fixed, regular, and adequate. They are no longer homeless. What if the student themselves is the one making the arrangements for where they are staying? Are you talking about, I'm assuming, an unaccompanied youth, and they are staying at a friend's house? So you have to look at, one, is it fixed, regular, and adequate? Adequate would be, do they have their own room? Or are they sleeping on a couch? If they're sleeping on a couch, or there's multiple people in a bedroom, that might not be considered adequate. Okay, but if they're staying in a home and they have their own room, it's fixed, regular, adequate, electricity, running water, they're not considered homeless. Unaccompanied, perhaps, but not homeless. Good questions. What if the student is living with a parent that does not have custody, but the student is 18? Again, are they living in a fixed, regular, and adequate home? It's not a question of guardianship so much as where are they laying their head at night? Okay, what's their nighttime residence? And is that fixed, regular, and adequate? Some good questions. Give you just a minute or two, 30 seconds. Are we required by law to enroll these students? You are required to immediately enroll students if they indicate on their housing questionnaire that would give you some kind of indicator that they are homeless. However, then it's up to you to follow through with that. If you determine that they are not homeless, then you've got to deal with them then. And they have to go through all of the same qualifications or with the same documents that any other student would. But if they come to the school and they indicate that they're homeless, then you are required by law to enroll those students immediately. And then ask the questions, get the paperwork, that type of thing. If a student is living with someone else and paying rent, would he be considered homeless? No, because he's obviously has a right to be there if he's paying rent, right? So he's not, it's not that he would be asked to leave. Okay. Do you have an example of a homeless questionnaire you recommend using? We have one on our website. Also, I know that if you go to nche.ed.org or gov, that they have questionnaires on there that you might use.
And I'll send you that person's name if you want to aim her that direction.
If they're paying rent to sleep on the couch. Yeah, it may be a studio. That doesn't determine homelessness. It's right. It's long-term, fixed, regular. It's not going to be considered a homeless situation. And as you can see by these questions, everything is case by case. There's no one-size-fits-all. So when you ask a question about a particular situation, there's a lot of things you've got to look at to determine that answer. So there's not always a one answer fits every situation in this thing. When will the kickstand training be available, and is it mandatory PD for all liaisons? I was wondering when that question was going to come up. We are hoping that the training will be available to you in September, maybe late September. We will make an announcement when it's ready. It is mandatory for every district liaison to complete this training. We will send you, or actually Kickstand will send you an email with your login information. So if you are not the liaison of record, then you need to let me know as soon as possible, because I will be sending that list to Kickstand very soon. If a parent is staying with his mother, but daughter is staying with aunt, which school district would the child go to? Okay, so I'm assuming that they're in different districts, but where is the school of origin for each child? And with just this information here, I would agree with what's being said in the room here. You probably can't hear. It doesn't appear that they would be homeless. So if they're not homeless, then they're going to go to the school district where they reside in. Do you have a form of what you talked about today? Are you talking about a PowerPoint of this?
This is recorded, and you'll be able to watch this later.
Thank you, Gary.
Yep. Because she just came on a little late. So.
It'll probably take a couple of days to get it up on our website, but it will be there. for you to view and listen to at a later time.
And the PowerPoint.
And the PowerPoint will be there. Okay, that looks like that might be it. I want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.